I was one of the highest paid high school draftees in the history of the MLB draft. Yet I signed at 18, I got to the big leagues at 20, but by 25, I was hanging on by a thread with my career. And in today's video, I'm going to walk you behind the scenes of my story in professional sports and peel back the curtain to things that people never get to see. So, to start off, let me take you back a couple of years. It's 2007. I'm a sophomore in high school, and all I'm thinking about is I want to become a professional baseball player. Now, a lot of kids want to become a professional baseball player. But you see, I had this incredible God given ability. And I started to realize that I might actually be able to do this thing. So from 2007 to 2009, a couple of key things happened. One, I signed a Division I scholarship with the University of North Carolina. And number two, I hired my agent. Now, you might be thinking, as I'm getting closer to the draft, which was in 2009, that I would have a really good understanding of right before I walk into the draft what's actually going to happen. And this was one of the first lessons that I learned is that the draft is kind of like Houdini's black box. You have no idea what's going to happen. And this is what I see time and time again. I help athletes navigate this on the financial side today. And so often, we don't know what team of players is going to get drafted by until 45 seconds before the pick. We don't know what that team's going to offer until they actually pick up the phone on draft day and call you. So let me give you a quick behind the scenes story. I got drafted in 2009 by the Detroit Tigers. Yet the day before the draft, they called me and they told me that they weren't going to draft me. Now they drafted me ninth overall. I was the first pick that they had in the draft. But the day before, they told me they weren't going to draft me. So when I tell you it's like Houdini's black box, it's truly like Houdini's black box. So I get drafted. The Tigers actually pick me. And then comes time to negotiations. Now, I had a specific number in mind that I knew that if I got this number, it would leave me X amount of dollars after taxes and agent fees, all the other things that come along with it to actually be able to invest. My parents and I had thought really carefully and really calculated around this number, but it was a really specific number. It wasn't like 2 million or 3 million or 4 million or 5 million. It was a certain amount of millions point a certain number. So it was a very specific number. And the Tigers waited almost all the way up until the signing deadline to actually make their first offer to me. They were trying to create some leverage. Their first offer was the exact number that I thought I wanted to sign. Now you tell me, how would they have gotten that number? And this is one of the lessons that I learned was the reality is this is a need to know only situation. It's something I preach to all the families that we work with. You need to keep your circle tight because pro sports teams, they're almost like private investigators. They will do everything in their power to figure out every single thing about you, including what your potential number is in the draft or in free agency, because their job is to get the highest talent in their situation, that was me, for the lowest amount of money, which was their offer. So how did I take that offer and ultimately end up getting, about $2 million more guaranteed, plus a major league contract, which ultimately gave me about another $2 million of additional money? How I created leverage. Now, you might be thinking, well, how can you create leverage in the MLB draft if one team drafts you? You can only negotiate with one team. This is not like free agency. I don't have 30 plus teams to negotiate with. I have one team. So how do you create leverage? Well, leverage is all in storytelling. Now, consider in my specific situation, I was going to the University of North Carolina. That is a great school. I was really, really committed to going to school. I wasn't just bluffing and saying that that was my focus and that was my priority. I was going there. I was going there unless I got a certain amount of money that was life-changing money for me to turn it down. And all these things, in combination with my talent, in combination with my performance, created an incredible amount of leverage for me to be able to go into those negotiations, even though they were just with one team, and actually be able to create millions of dollars more in my pocket, even though technically on the surface, you have no leverage. You're negotiating with one person. So I signed for millions of dollars, and I think I'm going to become a big leaguer. And in fact, I even think that even more so over the next 48 hours because they are rolling out the absolute red carpet for me. I'm going to Detroit. I'm up on the Jumbotron. I'm staying in a 5-star hotel. I'm touring the locker room. I'm meeting all these big leaguers. Mind you, I'm an 18-year-old. And I am thinking, I might be in the big leagues the next day. Well, I come to find out that the red carpet only lasts 48 hours. And after 48 hours, I was shipped off to Lakeland, Florida. Lakeland, Florida is where their spring training site is. And I was staying in dorms, military barracks dorms that were built probably in the 1950s. We're talking brick walls. If you opened your eyes and you didn't know where you were at after being dropped there, you might think you were in a prison cell. But the reality was, this was what pro ball actually was like. It wasn't the red carpet that I just got. It wasn't that big league experience. I was now in the situation where I was going to have to absolutely work my tail off and grind to get to the big leagues. And I learned very quickly that you were just another number in the minor league system. And it was totally up to you, no matter where you got drafted at, to make it happen. So I've gotten drafted. I've gotten this money. I got my first paycheck, my first bonus paycheck. Now I signed for $5.5 million, but my first bonus paycheck was split up into different payments, was $1.2 million. And I learned really quickly, I got this $1.2 million in my bank account. I learned a couple things. One, Uncle Sam is real. It took almost 50% of my paycheck. I can still remember. In fact, I still have a copy of the pay stub. $1.2 million, and what I got after taxes was roughly $650,000. I learned super quickly what taxes were, how much they were, and how much they actually hit your paycheck. And the second thing I learned was that money, while it changes everything, because everything in my life changed. I went from having roughly $1,000 in my bank account to hundreds of thousands of dollars overnight, with millions of dollars more coming in the future. But I also learned that it doesn't change anything, really, right? Like I went about my day the exact same way. Was I going out and buying a bunch of new things? No, not really. And it made me understand that as money comes in, it is an incredibly valuable tool for our life. You know, in one sense, it changes everything, but on the other sense, it changes nothing. It simply magnifies who we are as people. Now, I know some of you out there are thinking, okay, so you got this check, you paid a lot of money in taxes, but I always hear these comments that the top 1% don't pay their fair share in taxes. Well, I will be the first one to tell you that athletes pay their fair share in taxes. For most of the athletes we work with at the moment, they're paying somewhere between 37% in federal taxes plus their state residency, which could be another anywhere from 3 to 5, all the way up to 13% if they're a California resident. So when I hear people don't pay their fair share in taxes, I'm here to tell you that athletes definitely pay their fair share in taxes. And in fact, of my $5.5 million, I would estimate that I paid roughly $2 million to the IRS in taxes. Have you ever heard those stats of the athlete that makes a ton of money that goes broke? It's roughly like 70%, maybe a little bit higher, depending on what source you have. In fact, they made an ESPN documentary, 30 for 30, on athletes going broke. And I've thought a lot about this as we've helped more than 50 athletes today in our firm. I've thought a lot about this idea of why do athletes go broke in the first place? And I would make the argument that it's the year one money trap that athletes fall into. Think about my situation. I go from having $1,000 to now all of a sudden, I have hundreds of thousands of dollars in my bank account. I can actually buy almost anything. If I want to put a down payment on a few $1,000,000 house, I could do that. If I want to go out and buy a Ferrari tomorrow, I could do that. If I want to go to Chipotle and get double chicken and add guacamole, I could do that. But here's the reality. Just because you can buy something does not mean that you can afford it. And one of the biggest mistakes that athletes have to make sure that we avoid is we have to avoid the year one money trap. And that is the idea that we are coming into all this money. We could buy anything we want, but that does not mean that we can afford it. Now consider 2 years before this, I was a sophomore in high school. I get drafted. I signed for all this money. I learned really quickly that they roll out the red carpet 48 hours. I learned really quickly that I'm going to pay a lot of money in tax. I learned really quickly that I can buy anything, but I can't really afford anything. And now my career has just started. Now, I mentioned earlier that I got to the big leagues at 20 years old. And to give you context, people that get to the big leagues at 20 years old end up being multi-time all-stars, making $100 million. I hate to break the news to you. I'm not a multi-time all-star. I didn't make $100 million in my career. And I told you earlier that by 25, I was hanging on by a thread. So what happened? Well, number one, I started to experience what pro ball was really like. And one of the first experiences I had was what I would call the travel grind. What people don't understand about professional baseball in general is when you get drafted, yes, you are a professional athlete, but that does not mean you're getting treated like these guys that are in the major leagues. No, in fact, we are flying Southwest flights, typically at 4 or 5 a.m. wake up calls, and we might be flying across the country to play a game that day. In fact, I'll give you a story. I was playing in New Orleans, and we had a game the very next day against the Albuquerque Isotopes. Now, for those of you that have never been to New Mexico, it is essentially like pitching on the moon. So for those of you that don't know baseball, what that means is every time I give up a fly ball that would normally go 300 feet, it might go 450 feet. Mind you, to get to Albuquerque, New Mexico from New Orleans on the same day and pitch that day, you're getting up about 4 a.m. You're taking the first Southwest flight out, and no, Southwest does not have a direct flight from New Orleans to Albuquerque, New Mexico. So in fact, what you're doing is you're stopping in Dallas, you're having a layover, you're like just a normal person. But oh, by the way, you're pitching that night in a professional game. And that was my own experience. And then you're going to get there. And if you give up 4 or 5 runs, I can all but assure you, you're going to be sitting in that locker room in about the 4th or 5th inning and wondering, what is going on with my life? Is this real life? And that is the travel grind of professional baseball. Now look, pro ball and pro sports in general, I would argue is one of the greatest jobs in the world. But the people need to understand that there's really no emotions when it comes to this. If you think about your job, you think about your career, if you're struggling with something, you probably have like a performance improvement plan. And when somebody delivers that message to you, they're going to tell you about all the good things that you're doing, maybe a couple tweaks you could do to make it a little bit better. Pro baseball is nothing like that. In fact, I can remember one specific experience where I had my no emotion night. Now, I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. So we have a team here called the Cardinals. I grew up a huge Cardinals fan. At the time, I was playing for the Washington Nationals, and we played against the Cardinals, and I was the long man in the bullpen. So what that means is I was the 25th guy on the roster. The starting pitcher really struggled that night, and I came in, and I gave up, I don't know, 4, 5, 6, 7, I can't even really remember, a lot of runs in roughly 2 innings. I all but knew after this game I was going to get sent down. So I'm walking to the bus after the game. Nobody's called my name. Nobody's telling me that I'm going anywhere else. I'm thinking I'm still going to be on the team. I see my phone ring. I look down at it. It's the manager. Hey, Jacob, can you come back to the office? I could have just asked him right there. I said, I know what's happening. You can just tell me I'm going back to AAA. So I come back to the manager's office. I sit in his office. He tells me, hey, Jacob, we really like you, but you're not performing well enough. We need to call somebody else up. We're not only going to send you down, but we actually have to designate you for assignment, which just essentially means you can go anywhere, but just not here. Now I'm in St. Louis. It's my hometown. I have a house there. My kids aren't there. My family's not there. They're on the road. They're in Washington. So I go home to a house totally by myself. And I realized that pro baseball, there's no emotions in this. The people that work for the team, the Nationals in that situation, great human beings, but they had a job to do. They had to make sure that the best performing team was on the field. And frankly, I wasn't one of those best performing people at that time. Now, I want to give you what the cure-all is in pro ball, and something that I think a lot of people don't quite realize. You see those articles that are out there, so-and-so is the hardest working guy on the team. So-and-so comes in before everybody else. So-and-so watches more film. So-and-so studies harder than everybody else. Let me ask you a question. In that situation, does so-and-so, whoever I'm talking about, the greatest player on the team, they're also probably the person on the team that's helping the team win the most. And the reality is in pro sports, winning trumps everything. So when I think about my entire career, when I think about going from being a top pick to signing for millions of dollars, to paying a ton of money in tax, to learning not to spend it all, to learning that there's this incredible travel grind with professional baseball, to learning what it looks like to have your no emotion night, one thing I learned along the way was that winning trumps all. No matter what you do, nobody will ever bother you, and everybody will always cheer you, assuming you are winning. And that's just the reality of pro sports. It is a business. It is a business first and foremost. And I learned that ultimately through my 11 years playing. And my goal with this channel is really simple. I try to educate people around money. A lot of times it has to do with athletes and entrepreneurs, people that bet on themselves. But I try to share real stories like this. Real stories of my own experiences. What did it look like going from an 18-year-old kid signing for millions of dollars, thinking that at 20 years old in big leagues, I'm going to make $100 million in my career, to not doing that, but still making sure that I made the most of my career. And as I reflect back on that, as I look back on that, it's stories like these. It's shares like these with people like you to make sure that whether you're a fan out there, whether you're a parent of a player, whether you're a player out there, to understand there's people that have been there. There's people that have done it. There's people that can help you. So if you're into that sort of thing, make sure you follow along and don't miss any future videos. Until next time, my friends.